Good morning, everyone. You know, one of my favorite books of all time was The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama. Personally, I found it inspiring, and obviously the American public did as well, electing the first black president at a time when many in the country still believed it could not happen. I'm here today to share a few stories about my life with a view to inspire one or two audience members to believe in themselves, to create opportunities that nobody might have thought possible, and seize those opportunities to bring joy to others and yourself. In 1968, when I was 6 years old, my family and I moved here to North Bay, Ontario, from Germany. My father was a corporal in the Air Force, and along with my 8-month-old sister and my mom, we moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a Mike's Milk store in downtown North Bay, and the following year into a 3-bedroom military house near Trout Lake. Now, North Bay was a great place to grow up, especially if you were into sports. And one year, when I was about 10 years old, a neighbor of ours suggested that I try flat water canoe racing, and so I did. Now, along with some others, we raced singles and doubles and fours, even 15-person war canoes. It was incredible, with a major side benefit being that we would go to regattas throughout the province, and later around the country, and for some, around the world. Now, when you're 10 years old and you get to go to Toronto without your parents to race in the Dominion Day Regatta, that's a really big deal. As we made our way down Avenue Road toward Lake Ontario, we had to detour around this incredible assembly of buildings. It looked like the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. It was Upper Canada College, sometimes referred to as the Eton College of Canada. I'd never seen anything like it. Now, like everything else in life, you start with small goals. And in canoeing, it was making it to the finish line without tipping and falling into the lake. But later we moved on to larger ones like winning provincial championships and national championships. Over the next 5 years, against the best in the big city and beyond, we enjoyed a great deal of success. And even though we were from a smaller community, we could compete, often winning the entire regatta, points total. Now, when I was 15, my family moved from North Bay, and the new community did not have a canoe club. I was a goalie in hockey, and when I was 12, my grandmother paid for me to go to Halliburton Hockey Haven, because the goalie coach was Johnny Bauer, her favorite. Well, I loved the in-camp sports and activities even more than the on-ice instruction. So I wrote a letter to the camp director offering my services to teach the fine people of Halliburton Hockey Haven how to paddle a canoe, and was hired. I was younger than most of my peers. I wasn't turning 16 until later in the summer. But most of my peers were actually from Toronto, and in fact, most of them went to Upper Canada College. Now, while their family owned cottages and some of the kids had cars at camp, what I came to learn over that summer was that they weren't that different from me. In fact, there were more similarities than differences. And recognizing this gave me the opportunity to dream, the audacity of hope. I worked at the camp for a number of years, and some of the camp staff members are still friends of mine today. When I went to university, I dove in with both feet. I got involved in student government. I was a DJ. I worked as a waiter at the pub. And my last 2 years, I was a student manager at the pub. And it was this experience that really propelled my business career, as I learned to motivate and manage a team in a very chaotic environment. Imagine 800 students having cocktails, letting off a bit of steam. Well, it was here that I embraced my love of sales, which was tough because our business school really was focused on accounting and finance and marketing. And the reality, and nobody wanted to talk about sales, but the reality is most of the people graduating, their first job was in sales. And if you were any good at it, usually with the discipline where you could make the most amount of money. Now, to be clear, everything wasn't perfect when I was in university. Amongst other setbacks, I was encouraged to run for president of the student union. And so I did so, and I lost, but at least I gave it a shot. Now, 5 years later, I was leading a small, expanding sales team of a US company opening offices across Canada when I really gave some serious thought as to what I wanted to do professionally. When I opened the newspaper, and people still did that back then, the first sections that I would read would be the sports section or the entertainment section. So I decided I needed to pursue a career in one of those two disciplines. I called everybody that I knew that were working in those areas without a whole lot of luck. When my wife and I went to see Rolling Stones at the Max at the IMAX theater at Ontario Place. Now, I wasn't much of a Rolling Stones fan at that point, but the experience was mind-blowing. Like, we felt like we were on stage with Keith and with Mick. And as the movie came to an end, I turned to my wife and said, I'm going to work for that company. Well, about a week later, there was an ad in the Globe and Mail for a film distribution sales manager at IMAX. I couldn't believe it. But there was a hitch, you know. There were 6 job requirements. I might have had 1. This was to be the sales job of my life. At a dinner party, my wife asked, does anybody know anybody at IMAX? Because there's a perfect job that Larry is perfectly qualified for. Well, sure enough, somebody said that they knew somebody, and I got the number. And I called the lady up and asked to meet with her. And she said, you know, I really don't have anything to do with the hiring. Just send your resume in. I later learned she was actually applying for the job herself. I insisted, and she agreed to meet with me to drop things off. And so I showed up 30 minutes early, and this is where I met Mildred. Well, Mildred was the elderly receptionist, bored out of her mind. She just wanted to chat, and chat she did. Over the next 30 minutes, I learned everything I needed to know about IMAX's film distribution team, their strategy, the hiring manager, everything I needed to go. And the following day, I started my phone campaign. Well, I probably spoke to Mildred another 8 to 10 times before she, exasperated, she finally said, listen, Mike likes to work late on Wednesdays, and I'm not here to screen his calls. You might want to try that. So, at about 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, the busy manager answered his phone. Hello? Hey, Mike, how was your trip to D.C. this week? Do you think Lockheed Martin will sponsor that next space movie? What? Yeah, I just continued on, you know. Well, yeah, those space movies have to be the great marketing for Lockheed Martin, especially at the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian. What a great deal this is for them. Confused, he goes, who the F is this? Oh, I'm Larry O'Reilly, your new IMAX film distribution sales manager. Well, he started laughing. He said, listen, we've already reviewed the resume and we've made the list of who's coming in for interviews, but call HR and tell them I've added you to the list. So I did, and the following Friday at 6 p.m., I was the 41st person to be interviewed for the job. I met Mike, and I said, hey, where's HR? Oh, we reviewed your resume. You're not qualified. She's gone home. You got 5 minutes. I got to take my kid to hockey. Go. Well, about 10 minutes later, he said, okay, call HR and tell her I've added you to the short list. On Monday, I phoned HR. She was not amused. Nonetheless, I did go through about 6 more interviews, and in the end, I was hired. I was in the movie business, and my life was about to change in a very meaningful way. What I'd figured out was that when you have nothing to lose, you have nothing holding you back. It's amazing what you can accomplish. And I applied this philosophy to my sales career at IMAX, rising to become the president of worldwide sales, traveling around the globe, immersed in Hollywood, the biggest and best museums and science centers. It was an incredible experience for which I'm extremely grateful to the Mildreds and the Mikes and the teams that we built and our studio partners and everybody else that helped me along the way. However, I want to share a couple of pivotal moments that had a major impact on the fortunes of IMAX and me as well. Now, when I joined IMAX, we had 70 locations, mostly at science centers and museums and destinations like Ontario Place, playing documentary movies, taking people on a journey from the depths of the oceans to the far reaches of outer space. In fact, Mike had been working on a space movie with NASA astronauts as our cameramen, and Destiny in Space was the first movie that I was out selling and marketing. However, IMAX founder, Graham Ferguson, he had more ambitious plans. He wanted to take a 3D camera in space and shoot the very first 3D movie in space. However, to do so was going to take about $24 million. Well, Lockheed Martin had sponsored the last 3 space movies. I think the most expensive was about $3 or $4 million. But Graham was undaunted. He went off to Kazakhstan, and using a 3D camera, he filmed a Russian rocket taking off. And debris was flying absolutely everywhere, including right into the lens, cracking the lens, which made for a great in-theater experience. So we managed to get the president of Missiles in Space of Lockheed Martin to the Sony IMAX theater in New York, and we showed him our 2-minute clip. He loved it. So we said we'd be back with a proposal. Well, over lunch, 5 of us met, including our CEO, the CFO, our head of film, the founder, and me. I was the junior by a long shot. And different ideas were discussed over this lunch, and recommendations were brought forward. And finally, the CEO said, "Larry, what do you think?" I said, "Well, I do know that the Lockheed Martin people are a little miffed that they put up all the money for the space movies, and we keep the film rental receipts. I also know it's not like they can take out ads in the New York Times, buy my rockets. You know, they've got money to spend. So why don't we get them to put up 100% of the money, and we'll give them 50% equity in both the movie and the cameras." CEO said, "Hey, I like this idea. Go sell it." And I did. Along with the CFO and our head of film, we managed to get the deal with Lockheed Martin. Space Station 3D, narrated by Tom Cruise, was a huge PR hit for IMAX and a major step forward to getting Hollywood in the IMAX business. It was also important to James Cameron as well as Tom Cruise. Now, after Titanic took Best Picture at the Oscars in 1998, James Cameron was on a flight from LA to Toronto to be honored in his hometown of Niagara Falls. I happened to be on that same flight. Notice Cameron a couple rows ahead of me. IMAX really was desperate to get Hollywood making movies for our IMAX theaters around the world. So I had to make my pitch. I needed a hook to get going. So the plane took off, and I had a couple of our 3D technical experts on the flight with me, and I went to them and I said, "I'm going to go pitch the king of the world to get in the IMAX business." They go, "You're crazy." Well, I said, "I need some material. What do you got?" They said, "Well, you know what? We spent the morning with Stan Lee, the inventor of Spider-Man, and he loved the 3D footage we showed. And it was well known in Hollywood that James Cameron wanted to direct the next Spider-Man movie." So I approached Cameron, who had his head down. He was working, jotting away some notes. I said, "Hey, Jim, I'm Larry O'Reilly. I'm from IMAX. We have some really cool 3D content you should know about." He looked up and sneered. "Like what?" I said, "Well, we just spent the morning with Stan Lee, and he was blown away. Sit down." Well, over the next couple of hours, we talked about the opportunities around 3D movies. And he agreed to come the following week to the California Science Center to actually see some IMAX 3D footage. As the plane was coming down, I said, "Well, can you give me a business card so I can make the arrangements with your assistant?" He started laughing at me as if I need a business card. He said, "Give me your card." So he takes my card and he writes Jim Cameron and he writes his phone number and he said, "Give me 5 minutes after we land and then call my assistant and make the arrangements." I was on cloud 9 walking off that plane. I was so excited, I just couldn't wait to call our CEO in New York and tell him the good news. So I did, and they seemed a little less excited than I was, and I said, "Listen, I need to be able to bring one of the 3D experts with me to LA next week." And I said, "Not a problem." And then he said, not without saying, "Don't worry, Larry, Cameron's not coming. At best, he's going to send one of his people." Well, at the appointed time, my cell phone went off. "Hey, Larry, it's Jim. I'm in the parking lot. Can you come and get me?" So off I go and grab Jim Cameron and bring him in and had him meet with our 3D expert and our head of post-production. And we showed him some footage, and he was convinced. The next 2 movies he made were documentary movies in 3D, released in IMAX. But more importantly, Avatar was conceived to have the ultimate experience in an IMAX 3D theater. Now, these are just 2 examples of the role I played in expanding IMAX from 70 locations to over 1,400 globally, and in the process, changing the way that consumers experience event movies. I had some of the most incredible experiences going to multiple Super Bowls and NBA All-Star weekends, developing films with the NFL and the NBA, Hollywood premieres, including Cameron's Titanic. I had dinner in the Emperor's Dining Room in the Forbidden City in Beijing, aside from meeting and working with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. But I'm here to tell you, IMAX was anything but an overnight success story. The month I joined, March of 1993, the company was 25 years old. And I later found out that if they hadn't sold a theater the prior month, they weren't making payroll. That same month, the company was sold from the founders to 2 investment bankers in New York who wanted to commercialize the success of a new IMAX medium, IMAX 3D. However, it wasn't until 2007 that Hollywood embraced IMAX in a bigger way with a larger flow of films. It took 14 years. And then 2 years later, Cameron's Avatar came in and really broke things open. But along the way, it was a roller coaster of highs and lows, including a very real threat that the company might not make it. For the last 6+ years, I've been the CEO of a company that beams live holograms of people all around the world. Similar to IMAX, we've been creating a category of technology and storytelling that did not exist before. It was exciting, never easy, but the reaction of our clients, and sometimes their clients, to the experiences that we were creating was off the charts. Like, we were doing really cool stuff, most of which had never been done before. Things like capturing President Zelensky in the palace in Kiev and beaming him into the 4 biggest tech conferences in Europe at the same time in the middle of a war. Or capturing best-selling authors like Malcolm Gladwell in New York and beaming onto a yacht in Antarctica. Or the Crown Prince of Dubai delivering the keynote address at the World Government Summit, and working with a whole host of celebrities like Celine Dion and Martin Short and John Hamm. And while everyone loved what we delivered, we actually couldn't sustain the business model to get to profitability. And just in October, we had to wrap things up at Art Media. I got to tell you, I was really nervous delivering this news to our incredible team that was based in Toronto and New York and LA and London and Hong Kong. We had the town hall call, and what shocked me was the news was met more with an appreciation of what we had accomplished and the culture of the company than with disappointment that had now come to an end. You know, even in defeat, because we'd given it a shot against absolutely impossible odds and we had enjoyed some incredible successes, there was still joy and, surprisingly, optimism. Now, I wanted to share these stories with you today to give you hope and to encourage you to dream big. You know, there's been a recent generation of people in North America who've been told since birth, you can be anyone, or you can do anything. You just have to set your mind to it. Well, I know that's not true, otherwise I'd be the next Mick Jagger, and if you ever heard me sing, there's no chance of that. However, what I do know, that life can be tough sometimes, and daunting, especially when you're young. So the last thing you want to do is set limits and not give it a shot and potentially realize your potential. One last story. I was sitting on a plane from Dallas to Miami, and I was reading Barack Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope. And the man sitting next to me leaned over and he said, yeah, he's a pretty good speaker, but the country's not ready for a black president yet. I was a little bit taken aback. I mean, I was caught up in the euphoria of Obama and all of his charisma. But obviously, the gentleman was dead wrong. I encourage you to be brave and think beyond your natural borders. Realize your potential and bring joy to others and yourself. Thank you very much.